Okay, okay. Welcome, Jen, to the Inspired Idiot Show. I'm so excited to have you on today to talk about homeschooling and entrepreneurship.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. So, to kind of give you a little bit of context, I asked you to come on here because we got connected by a mutual contact who said that you have basically built a business around teaching people how to homeschool their kids. And I have so many questions about that. And this show is basically for people who feel like inspired idiots. So to us, an inspired idiot is anybody that is trying to build the life that they actually want and they don't feel like they know what they're doing half the time, but they're kind of just committed to figuring it out as they go. Um, I believe that every quote unquote successful person is an inspired idiot. So I want to make content about people who are building their, unrealistic life and just get them to share a little bit about their journey. So I'm going to ask you some maybe taboo questions about your business and your experience with homeschooling and, your journey. And I mean, if you're down to talk with me about it.
Okay, sounds fun.
Nice. Okay, cool. So the first thing I always like to ask people is if you were going to explain to a sixth grader what you do, how would you explain it?
Okay. I love this question because I'm like, what do sixth graders think of? Like, how do they process things? But I guess I would say that I help working homeschool moms. So, homeschool moms who also have a job figure out like how to put everything into their life a 24-hour day, a 7-day week without burning out. Because when you work and you homeschool, you have several roles. Your teacher, then your employee or boss, depending on what you're doing for work. And then, you still have the mom job and then you still have the wife, girlfriend, whatever, daughter job. And it's a lot. It's a lot of hats to fit into one life.
Hmm.
And it's exhausting. And so finding those rhythms and routines and plans are really important.
Nice. Okay. So would you say that a lot of the people that you help are working moms in that they have a job, or would you say a lot of them are entrepreneurs who are running their own business?
Surprisingly, it's a good mix.
Okay.
A lot do run their own business, but a lot of them also work outside the home. They work, at home doing, jobs where they clock in, clock out. Some are public school teachers, some are in the medical field. So it's actually quite a mix.
So some are public school teachers that have chosen to homeschool their kids.
Yes.
Interesting.
I
Oh, wow.
know.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's very interesting. I would love to talk with some of those people. Um, okay, so for you, I mean, it sounds like you kind of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. Did the choice to homeschool your kids come before entrepreneurship, or were you already kind of interested in building something before you chose to homeschool your kids?
No. So I homeschooled first. And I was one of the many reluctant homeschoolers. I had no desire to homeschool my children, absolutely none. But I ended up homeschooling and stuck with it all the way through. And so then I started my business after that.
Okay, what made you not want to homeschool?
Oh, because I didn't know anything about it. So you have to realize I've been homeschooling, at 14 years. I've been in this space probably about 16. So it was a long time ago. I mean, things have changed in the public school system, hopefully for the better since then. But when I took my oldest to the current local public school, he was 4. And, he was going, they always do like a pre where you come in and you meet the teachers and you kind of, they had to meet like a nurse and they got evaluated, like, their eyes checked and all that stuff. I had full plans on putting him on the bus, sending him to public school, spending time with my youngest, like, um, but at that time, there was a rule of, you don't fail a child and you don't jump a child ahead. And the classroom size was large. And I mean like 40 kids to one teacher. They
Wow.
didn't have teachers' aides at that point. Again, we're going back to like the early 2000s here. So, yeah, he went through and the teacher came to me and said there was a problem. He could read just little words, like 3-letter words, his colors and numbers. And I was like, okay, I didn't see how that was a problem. But she said he would be bored in his class and she recommended I homeschool. And I thought she was out of her mind because I was like, I don't have the patience for that. I will not make it. Between him or I, one of us isn't going to make it. And I'm pretty sure it's me. So I laughed and went home and told my husband, who was like, why don't you try it? And then I thought, okay, he's also lost his mind. But, and I'm forever grateful for her honesty. Like, I know some people get very upset when I tell this story. I said, but you have to realize her situation too, right? Like, she has 40 kids. I mean, it was a huge classroom, no help. In her eyes, she had this child who's going to be a problem because he was going to be bored out of his brain. So, I really appreciated her honesty. And of course, I had to make the decision in the end. So that kind of where I started, but I really didn't want to. Like, I was not a fan of school when I was a student. I did not excel. I hated studying. It was just really hard. And, I didn't have patience. You always think of, like, social media really displays homeschool parents as these meek and mild and graceful and gentle people. And I was not any of those. So I was like, yeah, I didn't want to homeschool, but love the journey. Totally happy that I went with it. Both kids have since graduated, moved on to do exactly what they want. So I'm really happy.
Wow. So what started you on this whole journey was a teacher basically suggesting like, "Hey, your child is going to be bored in the classroom because was did you say like he was reading ahead of other kids or?"
Yeah. Yeah. So back then, so I'm in Canada, we have kindergarten,
Yeah.
primary. So, you know, at that time, her job was to teach numbers, colors, shapes, reading. He knew all that. And not because I was doing anything that I thought was fantastic. I literally just read to him and played with him often. But he picked those things up. He read very early, which I didn't know. It was the first time mom, like, when are kids supposed to read? When are they supposed to do this? Uh, I don't know. So yeah, that's what it was.
That's interesting. This
Yeah.
one of the kind of I think misconceptions that I've observed a lot of people have about homeschooling kids is that like you said there's a perception around like what those parents are like and they're very like kind of loosey and like I've even heard people use the term like hippie before and like almost this idea that like some people choose to homeschool because they don't care about education, but the more
Mm,
I've explored it, the more I've found that it seems to be kind of the opposite. I've spoken to a couple other people who said similar to what you said that they actually chose to take their kids out of school because their kids wanted to learn either faster or just in a different way than the classroom allowed. And when they took their kids out of public school and homeschooled them, they'd watch their kids start thriving because now they could read as quickly as they wanted to and they could learn at their own pace as opposed to trying to fit in where 30 other students are.
yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. um okay, so what made you, I guess, so you that kind of started you on the journey of homeschooling and you said that you have two kids. Okay. So when the second one then got to schooling age, was it kind of an easy decision for you at that point to homeschool your second as well?
Yes, because I have the second child that wants to do exactly what the first child does.
Mhm.
So when we started homeschool, so there's only 22 months between my kids. And so when I started the first one, I didn't know anything about homeschooling. I had no one to ask, really no idea what I was doing. So I did everything that you shouldn't do. Like, I sat at the table, I had the chairs, they had to raise their hand. It was awful. Okay. I mean, anything and everything that you can do wrong, I basically did. So I duplicated public school at home. And so I had this little one who also wanted to sit at the table. So she just kind of went along with the lessons. We did, I think, I forget the name of the program I used, but it was a lot of cut and paste and coloring and memorization and reading. And she just loved it. And so, as soon as the age had changed, where she could register for public school, which was great because she was going to have to be 2 years behind him. And then she was just one when they changed that. So she was really happy with that. But yeah, she had no desire to go to public school. And, I'm one of those parents who feel like education is such a personal choice for each family. Each family has to decide what is right for them and their child. Some children do really well in public school, some don't. And you may have a child that does great in public school, and you may have a sibling that does not. And I think, you should be able to make those choices. Hopefully, you live in a country where you can do that.
Mm.
So every year we had that discussion with the kids, what do you want to do? Do you want to go try public school? Do you want to do homeschool? And we had those discussions as they got older, and they always chose homeschooling. But yeah, she really wanted to keep up with him. It
Mhm.
was fun.
I bet. So when you first made that decision to homeschool, did you feel like you got any, like, pushback or judgment from people in your community or people in your close circle?
Not when I chose to homeschool. I got that pushback when I returned to work. So I started homeschooling, and then due to our financial situation, I needed to go back to work. And I chose to work outside the home full time. Well, my husband also worked full time. And then again, I was alone again because I was like, okay, I'm homeschooling and working. And I didn't know anybody that did both at that time. You either homeschooled and stayed home with your kids, or you went to work and you put your kids on the bus.
Mm.
So I was trying to juggle both. And a lot of people thought I'd lost my mind, which was fine because I thought I had to. And again, I was very much in this like, I had to figure this out, and I didn't have any help. And that's kind of where my business has come from, because I was like, I was doing this by myself. And I was like, am I the only crazy person in the entire world who is homeschooling and working at the same time?
And you were working like you were going to an office, like you weren't working from home.
No, no.
Wow. So how did you do that?
Work outside the home and homeschool?
Yeah.
Um, a lot of juggling and like really letting go, like really letting go of the idea of what homeschooling had to look like. Because homeschooling was a flexible piece, right? Work was like you show up, you do your job. Your boss set your hours. I actually worked in retail, not an office, which made it even more difficult because I didn't have a set schedule.
Mhm.
So I couldn't I had childcare. We had paid childcare, and then we had backup as family that would like step in if we couldn't do the childcare. But I really had to let go of like homeschooling had to happen between Monday to Friday, 9 to 3. Again, like I was still fairly new at homeschooling, so I didn't realize that was happening. And I also didn't realize how much your children learn as we do. But for some reason we have it in our heads, especially if we've been through public school, that your child only learns when they're sitting at the desk doing something.
Mhm.
We don't learn like that as adults, right? But I don't know why my brain was like, this is how a child works. This is how it all works. So yeah, it was a lot of letting go. I had this light bulb moment where I was driving home after I'd pick up the kids. And I always talked to them like I always shared some highlights from my day, like, oh, this is a funny story, or I was like, what did you do? And my oldest was like, I learned about the solar system. And I was like, solar system? Like, we weren't doing the solar system in anything. Like, where did you learn? He had found a book. His childcare provider had pulled it out. They looked up things on the internet. He drew pictures. And it was at that moment I was like, okay, he doesn't need to be sitting doing this or that to learn. He can learn. So we really changed up when we did seat work, is what I called because my kids love workbooks. I know it's weird, but they love workbooks. They loved anything with paper and books. So we would do all of our seat work together in the evenings or on my day off. And then they would do all like independent work or strewing or like playing games and all of that and reinforce what they were learning. So once I made that adjustment, plus, being okay with asking for help. As a mom, I was very much like, I can do it. I can do everything. My husband was like, let me help, but let's have that conversation. So once we had some more of those conversations, it slowly got better, but I had to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a very big, like, underlying lesson that I found when I went from being an employee to being an entrepreneur. I felt like I had to unlearn a lot of what public school taught me, and a big one was, like, unlearning the idea of like failure is bad or you have to have a plan for everything. And I've learned that this is one of the things that I always say in these videos and with my content is like, if you are just willing to figure it out as you go and give yourself that grace to say, I'm just going to figure it out when I get there, that's literally all you have to do to build any business or to figure out how to homeschool your kids is like literally just trust yourself that you're just going to figure it out.
Yes. Yeah. And I do think that's one of the the obstacles. A lot of people, when they're homeschooling, they think they have to have all the answers.
Mm,
And one of the best things is when your child comes to you and asks you a question, you say, I don't know. Let's figure it out together. And then you teach them how to learn.
mhm,
Because in today's world, as you know, especially being in the online space, technology keeps changing. And you can't teach them technology really because by the time they're older, it's going to be completely different. But if you can
mm,
teach them how to teach themselves something, and again, yeah, it took me a long time to be okay with failure.
mhm,
A long time. Like I would beat myself up so bad afterwards. And I was like, but you don't know until you've tried. And so if our kids can learn that lesson, especially from watching you do it, then they're going to be okay because they can just teach themselves whatever they need to in the future.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest, like, for just what I've learned and what I've experienced by just telling some people around me that when my husband and I have kids, we probably will not put them in the public school system. And I already see the pushback and the kind of the judgments that people have. And one of the really common ones I hear is like, well, how are you guys going to run a business while you teach your kids? Like, that's a full-time job. And I think it's because people have this perception that homeschooling looks the way public school does, in that like you're educating your kid for 6 to 8 hours a day, and you have to be there to make sure that they're doing all their workbooks and stuff. But and maybe this, I mean, being that you're also in Canada, I'm assuming that you probably follow a similar curriculum. But a gentleman that I spoke to who lives here in Canada said, when that's that same one who pulled his kids out of school and then said that they just started thriving. He said, like, people have that misconception that schooling is 6 hours a day. But he said, my kids do their schoolwork for probably about 2 hours of the day, and then they're done. And the rest of the day is like real life active learning. So we're teaching them, like, how we bake bread and how we go tend to the garden. And they're still learning, but it's not sitting at the table with a pencil and paper. And
Mhm.
that's not what homeschooling has to be.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you basically you knew that you were going to go back to work. You guys got some help from people in your circle, but you also hired some childcare. And am I correct in assuming that you didn't necessarily hire that childcare to do the homeschooling for you? It was just to look after your kids while you went to work, but then you would handle the homeschooling when you were at home.
Yeah. So my kids were old enough to not to be in daycare, right?
Mhm,
So we have the conversation about childcare a lot in my community because it's like, what do you do with your kids while you go to work? And that's a valid question, especially if you work outside the home, or some people work at home, but they have to have closed door policy, right?
mhm,
So it's like that depends on what kind of childcare. Usually, I do not recommend trying to hire childcare to teach your kids.
mhm,
Um, so as my children got older, they had homeschool lessons or things that they could do without me. Online programs, they could take their textbook workbooks, things that they were comfortable with. We also had some guidelines in place, like if you get stuck, here's what to do. I always checked in on my breaks. I was called, was like, how are you doing? They had access to a phone. So, you have these things in place, but most of their like one on one instruction or things that they needed help with would do before, after, or weekends, holidays, that kind of thing.
mhm.
And yeah, the childcare was there to basically look after the child because they weren't old enough to be left home.
Mhm. Right. So what were some of the more kind of challenging parts of homeschooling your kids? Like, I perceive that one of the challenges might be like actually getting them to do the work, but maybe that's just a false perception on my part.
Oh, no, there are days where the kid's like, absolutely not. Because we all have, good days and bad days. Trying to think, that's a really good question. What is the challenge? Fine. Okay. The biggest challenge for me, and it's very much a parenting challenge, is that you get everything figured out, right? So you're like, okay, this is the program that works. This is the format that they learn. This is, and like everything's clicking, and then your child changes, and you're like back, and all of a sudden, like they don't understand the program. For me, it was math. Math was the hardest for my youngest, and everything. I just remember my husband after work, he was trying to teach her fractions, I think, and he had like the pizza drawn on a board and he's like doing all this. It got to the point where she wouldn't eat pizza. That's how bad it was. She was like, I hate pizza because she could not get this. And this math program that I absolutely loved worked for years, just did not work. She needed someone who could walk her through the steps, sitting beside her, and she didn't want to do it like when I was available. So then we had to find something else. And I think that was the hardest part is because kids are always changing, right? And that's good. It's good, right? And seasons, I always talk about seasons. So you're like, sometimes you're just in the middle of it, and all you can do is put one foot in front of the other and keep going until you figure out what works. Because it's never if life is going to change, but when, right? So like,
Yeah.
especially if you work for yourself, there's busy seasons and then then there's annual seasons, right? And so things are always changing. And so just kind of learning to be okay with the day that you wake up and everything falls apart and having a backup plan.
Mhm.
Because there's going to be days, and it really is based on you and your family, what decisions you make, because you might wake up one day and your kids are like, I'm not doing it. And then you have to have a choice. Are you going to, too bad, you're doing it anyways? Or are you going to say, okay, we're going to take a break, and maybe you have a documentary day or a game day? They're still learning. It's just a different process. So it's all about like deciding what is best. And some days you roll with it and some days you don't. And that's just being human.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So if you could kind of take me back to that first time when you guys officially made the decision like, okay, we're going to homeschool. Where did you go from there? Like did the school that you were going to send your son to point you in any direction of like, here's the resource for homeschooling, or were you just like, I'm just going to Google this shit?
So Google and I were not friends at all. And my school did not help. No, no. So I do live in Nova Scotia. And the great thing about Nova Scotia is that there's no, I might think, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they don't check in on you. They don't, you don't, the bad thing is, like, you don't get a budget. You get zero help financially. You literally get zero help at all. They don't interfere. They don't give you guidelines. They don't tell you what to do, but they don't tell you anything. So, you go to the website, you find homeschooling in Nova Scotia, and it will say, oh, here's the forms. They've gotten better. There's some like examples now. So I didn't know what to do. I had friends that homeschooled, and it's kind of funny because there's usually two different homeschoolers. The ones that tell you everything and they like give you all the information and you're drowning, or there's the ones that are like, yeah, you'll figure it out, and you get nothing. So I had a lot of the you'll figure it out. So I contacted this like website for homeschooling Nova Scotia. I asked for them to send me like the syllabus because I was so scared. I was so scared. I was like, my kid's going to be behind. I don't know what to teach. What are they supposed to learn? And I didn't know where to look and I didn't know what to do. So I asked them to send the syllabus. And I remember the post office car coming up, and she came out with these huge boxes of paper of lessons. And she dropped them and she's like, here you go. And I just sat down and cried because they were huge and overwhelming. And I didn't know no teacher even uses all of that in the public school system. They don't, but nobody tells you anything. So yeah, it was fun. There was a lot of tears. And yeah, eventually Google and I became better friends, and I searched a lot and we discovered things like unit studies. And I just we went to the library a lot, and the librarians were awesome. The library was so different from when I was a kid. It was less being quiet, and they had like game day, and the librarian was really, really helpful. And yeah, eventually we figured it out, but no, the school did not help.
So this box of papers comes to your door. You break down because you're like, holy shit, I'm gonna have to learn how to teach all of this to my kids. So did you kind of then take that and just like eventually kind of pare it down? Or I guess like how did you navigate going from I have no idea what to do, I don't know how to make sure my kid's on track to just creating some kind of plan for them? Like how did you do that?
I opened up the boxes, I looked through them and thought, I can't do this. Like, I'm not doing it. So we used it to start fires, actually. I have a wood stove, as you can see it behind me, and that's where the paper went.
Okay.
Because I was like, I just can't. And so I just was like, okay, I found I wish I could remember the name of the website. I don't even know if it still exists. It was a kindergarten program, and it was A to Z, and it was like something you'd start. So it was letter of the day, letter of the day, letter of the week. And so that's what I did. I just found this one website and I was like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And eventually my kids hated it. And I started to hate it too because it was so much like cut and paste and, things my kids were not interested in. Like, how much memorization do you really need? Sorry, some people love that in their homeschool and power to you, but I was like, no. So we just, like, I started going and I talked to the librarian. I was like, we're in grade primary. What are they supposed to be learning? And she's like, can they read, cut, color, whatever? Like, it's simple. Primary takes like maybe 30 minutes a day. And I was like, oh, so we did a lot of playing, a lot of Play Doh, a lot of games. And that really helped. And then as I got better with um, Google, I found a provider in New Brunswick, which is a province near us, for those who are not familiar with Canada. And she had a store, and that woman was a homeschool um, mom herself. And I would just call her and I'd be like, I don't know what to do. And she's like, okay, I have some recommendations. And she would ask me questions like, how does your child learn? How much time do you have? And so that was a changer, like a game changer for me. And so she would send me the books, like obviously I'd pay for them, but she would send me exactly what I needed. We would try it. If it wasn't working, I remember the hardest part is I really wanted my children to learn how to cursive write clearly. My handwriting is so bad. It's so bad. And I was like, my kid's going to learn how to read and write. Yeah, finding a program was really hard. And we must have
Mhm.
went through 6 different books before we found something that worked. But, it was nice to have somebody in your corner that was like, you can absolutely do this. And she ended up putting her children in the public school system because I was like, what happens if, they want to go? And she was like, oh, this is what happened. She's like, my child had never taken French before. She's like, within 3 months, they were caught up to class and there was no problem. And I was like, okay. And I just got brave. I started calling public schools and I was like, hey, what are you guys learning for history? But eventually, I would say by grade 3, I learned not to care what was
Yeah.
going on in the public school because it did not matter.
Yeah.
It was
I
like,
think that I could totally see, like, just thinking about my personality type, I could totally see myself struggling with that, like, almost caring about, like, is my child smart enough for their age? Like, are they keeping up? Because I think that's something that I expect people will kind of judge you for a little bit is like if you're homeschooling and they think that your kid is like undereducated or like they're not meeting, quote unquote standards for their age, like I think that I would be conscious of making sure or wanting some kind of validation that like my kid is learning what they should be learning at that age. So how did you, I guess, navigate that, like giving yourself that validation of feeling like, okay, I am doing enough. They are learning enough.
mhm. I think it was when my daughter learned to read. So, like I said, new parent, right? When you have kids, you don't know what you're you don't know what to expect. And when your first child, you just think, oh, this is normal. So I did not realize my son learned to read early.
Mhm.
He was reading by like 3.5, like little words. We're not talking like books here. But I thought that was normal. So when my daughter didn't read until she was 5, I was panicked. I was like, she's never going to learn to read. I don't know and everyone was like, well, how did you teach your son to read? I was like, I didn't. I just read to him a lot because I love to read. And I was like, I'm going to read out loud. And I remember I put her name in letters on the wall and she started like picking out letters. And the day she read, I felt like so not validated, but like assured I could do this,
Mhm.
you know? And it wasn't until years later that I actually learned like, oh, age 5 reading is actually pretty normal. Some children don't read until they're 8 or 9, and that's fine. And nobody asks you, right, when you go for a job, okay, and how old were you when you learned how to read?
Mhm.
It's not a concern. The question is, can you read?
Mhm.
Um, and even if they ask that. So it got to that point. And I also think like, unfortunately, some people still quiz your kids. And that gets grading. It's annoying. But that hasn't changed. People still ask about socialization. They still will quiz you. They'll still say, why aren't you in school? And I think just learning to handle those situations with grace and also giving yourself grace. Like there are some things that you think my kid is never going to get this. And I think too, if you're public school taught, you think there's only one way to teach your children.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm rambling. But I was thinking it through a situation and I was thinking of how many times I tried to teach my son this one thing didn't work. And my husband come in and he flipped the way he taught it.
Mhm.
It clicked. And I was like, oh, so it's not always your child, it's the teacher, the way you're instructing, right? Like, don't be afraid to mess things, like change things up. And if have never considered myself a rebel. I'm always like a rule follower. I follow the checklist. I like my checklist, but I learned to be much more of a rebel as a homeschool. Like, I'd open a curriculum and be like, oh, you have to complete this in 1 year. And it was too much. And I was like, well, it's now a 2 year course. I'm going to split it in half. And I was like, nobody gets to say whether, like, I have that right as a homeschool mom. I can
Mhm.
change what they're learning. My daughter was dying to do chemistry, and, no one else was doing chemistry at that age. And I was like, okay, we'll do chemistry. Like, why not? Right. So I think it comes with once you give yourself freedom to
Mhm.
follow your children's lead, it can make homeschooling completely different.
Yeah, I think that's one of the like when I started kind of diving into this topic because again, like what initially got me interested in just like learning about the different types of schooling out there was getting into entrepreneurship and realizing how much school taught me that I really needed to like unlearn. Like around failure, around learning. I agree with what you said that I think the classroom setting kind of teaches us to memorize more than it does to learn and
Mhm.
I can even think back to me being in high school and junior high, like the way that I learned, because if I had a test coming up and I was like, I have to know these things, I memorized with a capital M. Like I would make flashcards and I would get like my sisters or my friends to quiz me. And I remember a friend one time saying to me, do you have a photographic memory? And I was like, I don't think so. And he's like, oh, I'm just wondering because like all of these, you're literally reading word for word. And I said, well, I think I'm just memorizing them. And
Mhm.
I think that the way that school is set up where you have like one teacher and then, sometimes 30 plus kids, I think the only way that a teacher can try to get those kids to learn is to tell them like sit down, be quiet, we're all going to learn this together. And I think it's too frigid. I agree with what you said that I think different kids learn differently and I remember so many instances in school. I don't know if I had ADHD or if I just have a very active creative mind, but like I found it extremely hard to sit in a classroom and focus and actually absorb what I was being taught. So then I had to go home and basically try to relearn everything again, just trying to memorize it. And I think I do agree when people say that that's not how most kids learn, especially in those primary ages. I do think that kids learn through play and through like real life activity, not being told, sit down at your desk, be quiet, learn with all the other kids. I think if anything, it probably messes a lot of kids up and gives them a skewed perception of what learning actually is.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Agree. And also I think like memorizing is great if you understand why.
Mhm,
Like, why is this important? What do you need this for?
mhm,
But I always love one of my favorite memories is because like you said in school, you're supposed to sit and learn. At home, my kids never sat. Rarely. Like once I realized they're learning all over the place, we had, exercise balls and I always love the picture on social media where it's like the mom is sitting and she's reading a book and the kids are all there. And I'm like, really? Because that never happened in my house. My kids are like upside down. And people are like, oh, do you have a classroom? I'm like, I have a small house. Our entire home was a classroom because they were in every room. They were upside down. They were on the sofa. They were under the table. And they were still learning. I would be like reading to them and they would be coloring or bouncing. And I'd be like, is there any point? No one's listening to me. And I'd ask a question and they would understand exactly what I was saying. And I
mhm,
was like, huh, like that was huge for me. And even now, like the way that I learn has changed. I listen to more things or I listen while I'm reading, following along, multimedia, and yeah, I think that's huge.
mhm. So this is actually one of the questions before we got on this call. I asked my husband, I was like, hey, do you have any questions about this? And he was like, yeah. Because I've noticed that screens are obviously so prevalent today. A lot of kids even like have their own iPads. And I'm not a parent yet. So I try not to cast judgment on people. But I see a lot of parents when they're getting fed up with their kids or when they're frustrated or when they're like, mom needs to go do something else. The easiest thing is to just give your kids a screen and let them just kind of distract themselves with it. So being that you were at home all the time with your kids at one point, homeschooling them. You said your whole house was the school. How did you kind of figure that out? And did you find it hard to resist the temptation to just, put a screen in front of them to kind of distract them for a while?
So times have changed. And I know I keep saying that, but like when we first started homeschooling, my kids didn't, I had a computer, but that was it. And I had a cell phone, right? But like, we were never big TV people. I mean, my kids used, I had particular shows. I think screen time is good and bad. Um, so my personal view is that using it intentionally, being really smart. Like I made sure that the shows my kids were watching were like Word World or Sid the Science Kid or Magic School Bus. Like they were learning. They weren't just and a lot of nature shows. My kids love nature.
Mhm.
But we were very much like an outdoor family. So we spent and I have a huge yard. So we were outside a lot. We read books. My kid, I remember walking into appointments and I'd sit down and both kids would pull out a book and parents would be like, "How did you do that?" I'm like, "I don't understand the question." Because we read all the time and my kids love to read. Now, mind you, now that they're older, my oldest writes stories, but my youngest kind of reads, not really into reading. She's very artsy though. She will paint, she will sew, and I can't sew. I mean, I can sew a button. I have no desire to learn. Unless I'm in the fabric store, then I'm like, oh, I wish I could sew. And then I leave, I'm like, no. But she very much like self-taught, into baking and cooking. And so we did a lot of that. As the children got older, screens, iPads, everyone had a tablet. So we did use some online programs, but I always have a hard time with this because when I started my own business, I spent a lot of time on my phone,
Mm.
on the computer. And so I felt like I didn't have the right to say to my kids, and again, this is my personal opinion. Not everybody agrees with me, but I was like, I can't say to my kids, you can't be on your phone if I'm on my phone. I mean, they didn't have their own phone until they were much older. They had jobs, they could pay for them. So again, it has a lot to do with like your family, your values, and things like that. But I made one of my favorite tools, especially for working moms, is quiet boxes. So they're kind of like the busy bags that you hear of, except there's nothing in them that's loud. That's very intentional because if you work at home and you work online, the last thing you need is a drumming set going off in the background.
Mhm.
And I use those for all ages. As my kids got older, they were filled with like Mad Libs or audiobooks or, things that they were interested in. But we also had a rule where we all had to be outside for at least a half an hour or an hour a day. We went for walks. So I think, my example, and it took some learning of my own, especially when you start your own business and you have social media and you don't realize that you do not have to be glued to your business 20 because at first you kind of fall into that, right? Like, I have to be available. I have to be available. What if somebody asks me a question on Facebook and I don't answer it? Not realizing that that person's probably not sitting by their phone waiting for you to answer.
Mhm.
So, I had to put some boundaries in that when I was homeschooling, reading with the kids, the phone was away in the other room where it would not distract me. So I think mirroring, setting the example for your children is half the battle, but also being realistic. Like there's a time and place for everything. And I will be one of the first ones to be like, if you absolutely need to focus and a quiet box or a quiet activity is not working for your children, pull out an educational and there's a time and place. So I'm like, yeah. So I don't know if I've helped you at all.
No, it does. It does. It's just cool to hear people's perspectives on it, especially somebody who spent all day every day trying to educate her kids, but also, being at home with your kids all day. I'm sure there were times where you were like, "I need to go do something," or "I need to, go work on something." And I imagine that it's probably very easy to just reach for whatever's easiest to kind of distract your kids so you can go do your thing. So it's cool to just hear people's experiences on how you handled that. Um, so what brought you, I guess, like how long have you been running your business now, teaching other people how to homeschool and what kind of brought you to that?
So I don't exactly teach other people how to homeschool, I don't think, but I like that idea. I handle more of the time management piece, like how to fit it in. Um, and I started in 2016. And so the reason I started is kind of funny. But my website, my blog started off as kind of a self-care project because I was working, I was homeschooling, I was doing all the things, but I didn't really have anything for me. And so I started this as like, as I mentioned, I can't be the only working mom who also homeschools in the world. But I couldn't
Mhm.
find a lot of things. And I'm sure it was out there. But like I said, Google and I were not friends. We still don't have the best relationship. So that's why I started it. And yeah, it just kind of took over and became, it's grown and it's become a business.
So it started as just something that you were doing for you, and then I'm guessing somewhere along the way you realized like, "Oh, this is helping other people," and then it kind of just expanded or
Yeah, I kind of knew that you could make money from blogging. I mean, this is back in the day, right, where it was a little bit easier. I had no idea what I was doing. And again, this was very much a learning project for me. I mean, I remember being so excited when I got a button to click on my website that opened in a new tab because I had no idea how to do that. Like this was everything was like researching, but it was fun for me. It was exciting. And it was like filling that need of educating myself too, right? And it was great because we had these conversations with the kids. They learned along with me. But I was like, I didn't really know how it was going to make money, but I did know that I wanted to help other working moms who are homeschooling because, like I said, there seemed to be very few of us at that time.
Mhm.
Since COVID, it has opened up. There's a lot more that are working and homeschooling at the same time. But back then, we were like, nobody knew who we were, what we were doing. And there wasn't a lot online because we were so busy working and homeschooling
Mhm.
that we didn't have time, to help others.
Mhm.
So I just started sharing what was working for me and a lot of my failures, everything that went wrong. And, people were like, what does it look like? Where do you fit it in? And so I just started answering those questions. And I opened my Facebook group and I thought maybe like 10 people would join. And so I think we're at 34,000
Wow.
right now. And everyone's like, how did you grow it? I'm like, I didn't really it's out there. People talk about it. Um, but it's been a great community just to see. It's amazing to me, like how many different types of work people do while homeschooling.
Mhm.
It's just been fascinating. And then how they make it work and how it looks completely different for everybody. Cause I always feel bad because someone will come to me like, okay, give me the checklist. Like, what does this look like? When do I teach? And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. Cause we could have the exact same kids, exact same job, use the same curriculum, and it will look completely different. And it's supposed to, right? It's supposed to be tailored for your situation and your child and your goals and all of those things. So it's been really fun.
Mhm. That's awesome. I think that's how I approach business as well, and that's what I think makes the most sense is, like, if you just start by doing something that you feel called to do, or you're like, "This is me solving a problem for myself," or, "This is me just documenting how I'm figuring this out." If you focus on, like, what would actually help me, it's almost certainly going to help other people. And then I'm assuming that the more kind of people ask you certain questions over and over, the more demand you see for things, then you're like, okay, I can just build a tool for that. But you
Mhm.
started by just thinking about like, how could I kind of help myself through this?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think the first thing I created was actually a printable planner
Okay.
because I was like, I need a planner with enough room for my work tasks and my homeschool tasks and then everything else that needed to be done. And I just never found one. The closest I got was a happy planner
Hmm.
because they're kind of pretty customizable. So yeah, exactly. I never really thought of it like that. But yeah, mostly like tools that helped me or tools that people have asked for. But
Yeah.
I haven't made anything like just because.
Hmm. So one of the and me maybe you can shed some light on this because I think that this might be a misconception, but I thought that in Canada, again, this could be totally wrong. I thought that it was actually like law that you had to put your kids in school up into a certain age, and that it was like policed in a way. I swear I heard stories growing up of like parents who wouldn't send their kids to school and like police officers would actually go to their house and pick up the kids and bring them to school. So I very much had this perception. Again, I don't know if that's true or if my memory invented that idea, but I always had this perception that going to school is not optional. And educating your kids with like a traditional education is not optional. But you said that when you started homeschooling, you found that nobody was checking in and nobody was making sure, like, are your kids testing properly, right?
Y- Yeah. So I may have, okay. So what happens where I am? You do have to register. So, but it depends. Like I know places in Ontario, you literally like, I am going to home educate this child and you send it off. Here, they have a little bit more questions. They want to know, like, what are you using? Are you using a box curriculum or are you making your own? I always made my own because no box ever actually worked for my children. So I would just list up everything I was going to do. I'd submit it. Sometimes you would hear back, sometimes you didn't. You just assume it arrived if you didn't and you went about your life. And then at the end of the year, you would put in, like, yes, I homeschooled my child. This is the things that we did. You can now, like I said, they've changed things over the years. There's more examples of what they want. There's more of an online form. You can put in more information. When you are finished, though, grade 12, you pass it in and you hear nothing. Because I actually called them and I was like, did you receive the report? Like, my son's done. Do I get like a diploma? No, you don't. So then I just called the colleges, community colleges, university, and was like, I homeschooled my child. What do you need from me if he decides to go? And they just kind of laid out what they expected. And yeah. So, I mean, they don't like show up at your house. Now, if you didn't register and you weren't going to public school, I don't know the situation then
Mhm,
because it would look like you were not educating your children,
mhm.
but I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And did you find, because you said both of your kids went on to post-secondary.
I didn't. I said they went on to do what
Oh,
they wanted to do.
oh, okay, okay, I misheard you, okay. I mean, I think that's even more important, though. They went on
Yeah.
to do what they wanted to do.
Yeah. So I do have a funny story. So my son is the oldest and he was like, I am never going to college. Absolutely did not want to go. And I was like, that's fine. I want to make sure that if you change your mind, you have what you need to go, or we know what's going to happen. So I had called the community college here, the NSCC, Nova Scotia Community College, talked to the principal. I was like, hey, this is the situation. Like, what happens? And he's like, oh, he just comes in, he writes an entrance exam for whatever course he wants to take. If he's missing some things, he can take those courses,
Mhm,
which is great because a friend of mine, her daughter, graduated public school, went to work, decided she wanted to take a course, had to go back to community college to pick up courses before she could do what the course that she wanted. So that's like not a big deal because at first I was like, oh, people are going to have a bad idea of homeschooling, right? Oh, they didn't have enough, whatever. But it happens
mhm,
all the time. Public school, homeschool, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so we had everything done. And long story short, he's working at the school. So he
okay.
works at the college. I'm like, people are like, does he go to college? I'm like, yes, but not for the reason you think. So
Mhm,
he is there, has a great job. He loves it, works night shift, which is perfect because he really hates getting up early in the morning. He did, though, for years because, you get that question, should I let my child sleep? What if they're a night owl? Again, totally up to you. We let him sleep. Like he needs to sleep. And people kept saying to me, oh, he's never going to be able to get up for that 8 a.m. call when he needs to go to work. And he ended up getting early morning work, had to be at work at like 6 a.m. He never missed a day. He was on time. Loves it now that he's on the night shift.
mhm,
That's more of his jam. But yeah, he likes that job. And then my daughter, um, interestingly enough, decided to go into retail. That's what she wanted to do. She wanted to go into customer service. And again, surprisingly, her hardest subject for her was math. She struggled. She did graduate with math, but she just was like, I don't want anything to do with math. So while she was at her job, she got promoted to an office job where she does bookkeeping and bills.
and she
So she
likes
deals
it?
with math all day, every day, and she loves it.
Wow.
So I share that because I know some parents are going to be listening. And I was terrible at math. I mean, I failed grade 10 math in public school, and they never had me write the exam. They just pushed me on to grade 11. And so if you look at my transcript, I have 9, 11, 12. There's no 10 because I failed it. And I thought, I'm never, like, how am I going to teach my kids math? And my son likes to say I didn't teach him high school. because he did a lot of the research. He taught himself a lot of things, which is great, right? That's what we want. We want them to take
Mhm.
ownership of their education. I mean, I guided, I answered, I was there to support. But in his eyes, he taught himself, and I'm like, okay with it. But like, don't let that fear hold you back if you feel like homeschooling is your best bet for your kids because you can figure it out, they can figure it out, and they will go on to do things that even they thought they wouldn't do.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
No, I'm glad that you clarified that because that's actually one of my I think one of my biggest beefs with the school system, sorry, is just that I think at least from my experience, you go to school, you spend 13 years in school if you count kindergarten. And then there's always this kind of pressure that you need to go to college or university after you graduate. And having the experience I have now, I actually think that's like the stupidest thing that we could tell an 18-year-old to do. Like you've just spent 13 years sitting at a desk learning, and now society puts this pressure on you to go pay a bunch of money to do the same thing again when you're 18. Like you've just spent pretty much your whole life being told to sit down and be quiet and learn. It's
Yeah.
extremely unlikely that you know at 18 what you want to build a career around. And I talk to a
Yes.
lot of people from the States. I have a lot of clients from the States, and I cannot even count the amount of times I've spoken to somebody who talks to me about they're in their 40s and they're still carrying tens of thousands of dollars of student debt because the system teaches you go to school, get good grades, go to college so that you can get a good paying job. But then by the time they get out of college, they're set back like $70,000. And now they kind of have this pressure to take whatever job they can get because they have this debt to pay off, let alone if they want to get married and start a family and buy a house. So I think for me personally, I kind of have started to reject that a little bit. I actually think if you have a child or, an adult, I guess I should say, who's 18 and they really have a passion for something and they know they want to pursue it, great. Like, I'm all for that. But I think most 18-year-olds would benefit from like going to travel, spending some time abroad, going to do like a mentorship or an internship or something. I don't think that we should pressure as many 18-year-olds to go into school right away because I don't think that after going through the public school system, most 18-year-olds actually know what they want to invest in.
I completely agree. And I also think that it's so unfair. I always feel so heartbroken when these kids are going into high school. So they're going into like grade 9, 10, and they're asked, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? I'm like, I'm in my 40s. I still don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. Right? Like, give them the skills. And I feel really bad because I have, friends whose kids are in university. They've been there 3 or 4 years, and those kids still have no idea. And I'm like, you're sending your kids to school, you're paying all this money. Your child has no clue what they really want to do. Give them like I'm all for the gap year. Like you guys want to take a year off, you want to work, you want to pursue whatever. My daughter did take a college class, which I totally forgot about until this moment, in art. She paid for it, she registered, she went, she loved it. Um, and it was kind of sad because the teacher was like, no one's going to make income from art. And I was like, oh, but she had fun and, she wasn't going there for a job, but she has all these interests. She's definitely like multi interested in everything that's artsy. And I love that for her.
Mhm.
So, let your kids explore absolutely because, they don't know. I mean, half the time I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said,
Uh,
I started my business in 2016. I had to learn it all. I made so many mistakes. I still remember the time I deleted every single image off my website because I thought once I put them in the page, that's where they lived. I didn't realize they lived in my media library. So, like, you learn from those things, right?
mhm.
And I think it's so important for our kids to understand that too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
100%. So if somebody was kind of thinking about making that switch, like if they're curious about homeschooling and they're like, I have no idea where to start, I guess, having the experience that you have and talking with the amount of people that you have in your community, what would you recommend to those people? Like what could their starting point be? What would help them in those beginning phases where they're like, I don't know if I can do this?
Yeah, so it has changed quite a bit. One of the first things I would recommend is going to, let's see if I can remember the names, but it's like HSLDA, I think. When you go to that website, it will have your state and the requirements.
Okay.
So most states and provinces have unique requirements. Like I said, in Ontario, I think the last time I checked, it's been a few years, you literally wrote a letter. But other provinces or states may have very specific requirements. You want to make sure you follow those. That way, you're not having any issues.
Mhm.
That's not saying that there's not a lot of freedom within those regulations. There is. So I would definitely start there um, as far as figuring out the requirements. I would also say give yourself a year, like a full year. I know a lot of people are like, I'm going to homeschool for the summer. Okay, that's good. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's a great way to kind of dip your toe in. But here's the thing, a full year will give you all of the seasons and not just like weather seasons, but because the way I find where I've discovered it kind of starts out is you get your plan, you have your curriculum, you're all excited, you start that first month, and you realize the curriculum you chose doesn't work. The routine that you chose doesn't work. Your childcare falls apart. Your work changes. And then the holiday season starts. Whether you celebrate or not, things around you change, right? So, like the lineups at the grocery store take 10 times as long. You're trying to get to all these arts and camps. Your family and friends are doing all of these parties. You also have to work and you're trying to homeschool. How are you going to handle that? And let me just say, you have the right. You can say, I'm going to take 2 weeks off. I'm going to take the month off of homeschooling. You can do that. You can step away from your books and let your kids learn. But it's like the whole rhythm. So then January hits. Now the holidays are over. You're burned out. You're exhausted. You're tired. And social media is saying, New year, new me. And you're having all this pressure. So this is why I say you need a year, right? Like you're going through that. February, March is usually burnout. You're exhausted. You're tired. By March or April, your kids are like, I'm done being in the house. I want to be outside. You're done. You're already looking at next year's curriculum.
Mhm.
So you need that year to take note of like, okay, this is when things fall apart. This is when the friction happens. This is how I feel. So that you can make those small adjustments. I'm not saying throw the plan out the window. Just like in business, you don't normally do that. It's those small, consistent changes that make a huge difference, right?
Mhm.
So, my advice is figure out your requirements, give yourself a year. And that first year really should be focused not so much on the academics, but if you're pulling a child from public school, deschooling, I had never heard of it. I think that would have changed my entire homeschool. I would have skipped that whole year or two of sitting at a desk. So, deschooling is about letting yourself and your kids forget about forget about the way the public school does things,
Mhm.
right? Like, kind of like figure out, like, how does your child learn? When is the best time that they learn? When's the best time you teach? Because your child might be raring to go at 6 o'clock in the morning and you're like, absolutely not. I need my coffee. So, take into consideration whoever's doing the teaching. Um, so yeah, that first year is really about how does your child learn? How do you learn? And how can you make it work between the two of you?
Mhm.
And so academically, everyone's always like in a panic. And I'm like, it's okay to really take that time. They're still learning. I'm not saying, release your child into the woods and never see them again. I'm saying, set them up for success. You can teach them even household tasks are huge. Life skills are so huge. My daughter was at work and her manager pulled her over and had her teach everyone else. Now, she was the youngest, how to fold clothes. They didn't know, didn't have a clue how to fold a t shirt. And it's because they didn't learn at school. Their parents didn't have time to teach them, whatever the situation was. So these are skills they're going to learn, like cooking, cleaning, things are going to learn forever. So, yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah.
And get a community. Please find someone else who's in a similar situation to you. Because I always tell my moms the hardest part about being a working homeschool mom is that if you go to homeschool people who do not work and you say, I'm having a hard time, the first thing they're going to tell you to do is to give up your job. And they don't realize you probably need that job to put food on the table and a roof above your head. And you go to your working moms and you say, I'm having a hard time teaching my kids. They're going to say, put your child on the bus. And maybe for you, that is not an option. So find someone who isn't going to say that, but is going to listen and understand that you're having a bad day and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. You gotta find people that are living a lifestyle that's aligned with how you want to live yours and also how you wanna raise your kids, and I always say to myself, I probably remind myself of this at least once a month, is that I try not to take too much advice from people whose lives I know that I don't want. So I think there really is power in finding people that are, like I said, building the lifestyle that they actually want and doing it with values similar to you. And, once you find your people, it does make it a lot easier when you have that community. So
It
speaking of
does.
community, if people watch this episode and they're like, I'm interested in learning more about what Jen does, I'm interested in learning about how they could maybe work with you in some capacity. I know that you said you have your community that people can join of over 30,000 members. What other kind of resources or options do you put out there for people to work with you or learn from you?
Okay, so I have a website, practicalbydefault.com, where I share, blog posts, and I have free resources for people. I also have paid products, tools. We have a membership for working homeschool moms. I also have a business mastermind for those who run their own online business and
Okay.
also homeschool. That's very small. I keep it small on purpose. We have some networking communities, but yeah, you'll find it all at practicalbydefault.com.
Nice. I foresee that I will be a part of that mastermind sometime.
Let me know. We can talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, this is awesome. I really appreciate you hopping on, and I feel like in the future there's probably going to be a part two to this conversation. But I am excited to put this out there and kind of dispel some of those myths about what working and homeschooling your kids can look like. So thank you for coming on here.
Oh, you're welcome. This was fun.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna hit stop.